Well, we're sitting here today with Ricardo Johnson, Managing Director of Marvel Citizen. From healthcare to food and energy to consumer tech, from incubating to early stage to building and operating at scale, they've opened and accelerated pathways to growth for emerging businesses and established ventures alike. We'll dig in a little bit more, Ricardo, on what it is that you do from day to day.
It's great. So high energy, had me engaged the entire time.
I think what's great about Kevin's message is that, no matter how naturally talented you are, or no matter how great you can be, you can always keep striving for that next level. And even, if you become complacent, you might not even realize you've done it. But Kevin really helps you realize, that there's so much more that you can do. If you take a step back, really reevaluate what you're doing and what you're not doing, you can take it to the next level.
I loved his message about God's gift to you and your gift back. And he's just so down to earth and just a helpful, wonderful man.
Really, I think you can put him in front of anybody and you're going to be inspired, you're going to be motivated, you're going to want to go out there and you're going to want to start, reaching for that next level today.
Hey, thanks so much for joining in to the Leadership is Personal podcast, bringing you real-world solutions to real-world challenges in anywhere from 3 to 10-minute increments. Leadership is personal. Here's the better results.
Welcome and thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we start with, Ricardo, what do you do every day?
I am ostensibly a strategist. Okay. Whether we're talking about interpersonal relationships inside the office, whether we're talking about the expansion of markets or the connections of small market opportunities in enterprise environments, I am creating the connective tissue to facilitate those relationships.
It's interesting. You said you're a strategist, and the way that you just explained that would not really have me make a clear distinction between being inside of a company or corporation versus being an entrepreneur. Now, I'll be the first to tell you, I would have never in a million years thought I'd see you back inside. And so maybe help me to understand, if you will, one, tell me your difference between the two that you can see, and then what made you take the plunge and go back?
Well, it's funny. When you called me last week and said that I had gone back, I felt like you'd called me a name, a pejorative. I was, what? And then I thought about it and I was like, man, I do. I go into an office. We were talking earlier. Where I am now is where I worked every day and in my home. I think there were a lot of, as I've gotten older and I've had greater experiences, historically, I graduated in college in 87 and save this year, I'd only worked for a corporation for about 7 years of those years. And for many reasons that I won't get into, I didn't enjoy the corporate environment. And what I would tell people, the joke I would say is, it's like I'm this exotic animal, and the zoos would like me to live inside their environment. And so they create this really cool preserve for me. And when I first got in, it would be nice. I didn't have a cell phone bill. I got my own credit card, and I'd get fed up. I'd get healed. And then eventually I'd try to find the perimeter of the preserve. And then I'd try to push the perimeter of the preserve. And then eventually I would escape the perimeter of the preserve. Because I just didn't like the challenges, the bureaucracy, the politics, the things that when you are an entrepreneur, you don't have to deal with. Generally what happens is that you have an idea, you go after the idea. If it works, you get paid. And if it doesn't, it's generally because of you. As I've gotten older, I've been able to really merge the relationship between the entrepreneur and how an entrepreneur can operate in a corporate environment. And candidly, I merged it so much that when I did move over into the corporate setting, it wasn't much different than what I was already doing. The only difference was that now I go to an office every day. So I really, over the last 20, 30 years, had developed a system where I was getting regular checks, that I was operating while and as not as an employee, but almost as an employee with several insurance companies and other companies. So then when finally I made the decision, hey, I'm going to, show up at a place every day, it had to be a place like Marvel. And we call it the place for misfit toys, where very talented people who have worked at very big companies have come together to create disruption in a real way, and to be able to create opportunities, always for the good. The second week I was at Marvel, a company that we had engaged had misrepresented some of its business practices, and we sent back a $500,000 check because they didn't do business the way is consistent with how they publicized they did business. So when Marvel says that they are serious about being a citizen of the world and a responsible one, they put their money where their mouth is. And I have found the deeper that I've gotten into the relationship with the company, the more I found that to be true.
It's interesting. I think that's beautiful, number one. The reason why I think that's beautiful is because most entrepreneurial companies, or sometimes even certainly entrepreneurs and sometimes smaller firms, actually find it hard to be able to do that. Oftentimes, you're really in a battle against your value system because, there's more month at the end of your money. And so there's a funny thing about that mortgage, right? And that car payment, right? The quickest way to get on your feet, of course, is to miss a couple car payments, right? You will quickly find yourself on your feet. And so that's an interesting concept, right? That's one that I often, that I talk about with people who talk of being an entrepreneur, helping them to understand that there will be those tough times where you have to look yourself in the mirror and say, where am I willing to compromise? Or if I'm willing to compromise. Another thing that you said was kind of interesting, and not to hang on words, but you said you're a place for misfit toys where you make impact in a real way. Real way. Tell me, what did you mean by real way?
Well, you and I have been to several events around culture, race, where there is the appearance of concern. Where a major corporation will sponsor an event, or they will make a donation. All of these things are important. I'm not suggesting that they're not. But if you really want to know who someone is, take a look at what they do every day. Not that day, not that event, but what do they do every day? And the challenges that I've seen. Again, the challenge that I had working in corporate America, and one that I don't experience here at Marvel, is that when people are faced with the kind of decision to live their value in their day-to-day operations or in the day-to-day operations with companies with whom they work, they choose the money, and or they choose the path of least resistance. Or they choose, rather than to innovate, to remain committed to legacy investments or legacy hires. This lack of conviction was one of the reasons why I wanted to work for me. And the presence of conviction is one of the reasons why I enjoy coming to Marvel every day.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think if there's nothing else, there's one thing that I do love about this whole entrepreneurial endeavor. And I try to impart that to my corporate clients, and that is the opportunity to say things once. Because if you say it more than once, then you are politicking.
Right.
You can find yourself in meetings or wherever, and the ability to say things one time, then you're not politicking. I only brought that up because that was one of the things that you said you sort of despised about the corporate sector. For those people listening that have this, what I like to call romantic notion of being their own boss, what might you tell them in terms of mindset and the difference between the two?
Well, I have a friend of mine who I think the day we graduated from high school, had begun his long-term job, and now he's an entrepreneur. He's actually written some books around entrepreneurial. And when he called me the first time, I said, "Why are you writing a book about being an entrepreneur? You're not one." Now my hope is that whoever's listening to this was a much better entrepreneur than I was. While I was able to really amass great wealth, I also experienced significant loss. The loss of property, the loss of a marriage, the loss of friendships. You many times being an entrepreneur have to jump off the cliff, packing your parachute many times. And when you're sitting in a room and you're having to negotiate for a deal that if you don't get, your family doesn't eat, that's when you're an entrepreneur. That's when you realize, you know what, everything I eat is everything I kill. And, that has been some of the downsides, and that's been some of the beauty, is that I have been able to send my kids to private school and send them to college. And I have, for the vast majority of my life, lived off of the revenue that I generate. But I've also, Kevin, lived off the generosity of friends. I've lived off the hopes and ambitions of family. And I have been mentored by people who look nothing like me, who think nothing like me, but saw an opportunity to help someone that they believed had talent. And as you know, I spent a great deal of my time trying to repay that with young entrepreneurs.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's interesting. You said something, and I don't want to glance by it. You said you lost friendships. I think one of the challenging things that we find when we're out there trying to hunt and trying to kill is how many people engage in really transactional relationships. Do me a favor and juxtapose, if you will, for me. What's the difference between those in that sort of entrepreneurial level? The transactional nature of the business versus the ability to really build and develop long-standing.
Well, I think it could be an anthropological response. As an African American in Minnesota, not from Minnesota, there are legacy opportunities for communities that are not our community, that we just don't have the ability to. We don't benefit the way they do. We don't have the we don't have the credit resources. We don't have the kinds of things that really sustain an entrepreneur in times when they have an opportunity, but they don't have the resources. The analogy that I give is that there's a pot of gold 50 liters down, and you've got 90 liters of oxygen. So you can go down, you can get the gold, but before you get to the top, you drown.
Yeah.
And not having the kind of community that can provide you oxygen in a real sense, money, credit resources, those kinds of things, or oxygen in a personal sense. They cheer you on. They are inspired by your ambition. They are motivated and appreciative of the thing that you have that they don't. Many times our community doesn't have the ability to do that or the inclination. You and I have had that conversation where, you just want to have somebody say, listen, there have been times, man, in my professional career where I had to cut a meeting short because I didn't have enough money to get out of the parking ramp. And that is some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur, is that here I am having a massive meeting, critical meeting, but I'm literally going, okay, I got about 20 minutes left. When we talk about not enough money for the month, I didn't have enough money for the hour. Now listen, I have
maturity there though, Ricardo.
I'm sorry?
But I don't want people to miss that. That's maturity there, right? Mm-hmm. Because if you think about this world of social media and all this other good stuff, there's always this picture being painted around, I'm driving the big fancy car, or, I'm living in this big palatial, house, irrespective. I mean, you talk about athletes are always talking about, how much money they have, and they show you their driveway. Yet we know that 80% of them wind up broke, right? I mean, and so I think it's very valuable that you exercise that level of maturity to be able to say to folks, hey, man, it ain't all, happiness and roses, right? Sometimes there is some more month at the end of your money, and you feel like you're drowning, right? I mean, I can't tell you an entrepreneur who hasn't awakened at, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, just wondering, what the hell am I going to do? Right. I mean, I think we've all had those. We've all had those sleepless nights, those endless nights, and I couldn't agree with you more that you need that support network. One of the dimensions that I have. Jim Rohn says you're the average of the 5 people you spend the greatest amount of time with. I say you're the average of the 5 closest friends. And just for the people that are listening, I call Ricardo a friend, and I'm telling you, I'm bringing down the average. But I think it's very important that people recognize the network and the support and the relationships that you need, because quite frankly, sometimes you're the only person that can see that vision, and so you need those people that'll support you, that go, I don't see what you're looking at, but I see you, and I support whatever it is that you're trying to do. So, those people that are listening to this, that have this notion, of being their own boss one day, understand that, every entrepreneur that you see out there that are taking the flashy trips and sitting in first class and all of that foolishness, it's not like that all the time. I start out every story so that people understand where I came from, talking about how I had holy shoes. And I even had friends from childhood call me like, yo, dog, I don't remember that. What's going on? And I'm like, well, that's because you didn't know, right? And I wasn't mature enough at that time to tell you. And so I want to stop and say thank you, for that, for sharing that, and then also help people to understand that that's a necessity. So if you're thinking about this romantic notion of being your own boss, make sure you identify, who your network is going to be.
Now, I do want to say, I have spent a lot of time in talking about some of the challenges. The greatest professional experience of my life have come from the ability to create something that, but for my efforts, didn't exist. There are businesses that are operating right now, generated solely on my guile. And I don't say that arrogantly. There's no doubt that it was for the shoulders of many people that I stood on, and with the assistance of very talented people. But the ability to come up with an idea, I was in fact, just last week, just this morning, I was talking to a colleague. There is a very major effort going on in MSK with Blue Cross Blue Shield, because one day I was sitting in a gym with my son, watching him use a technology that I thought would work in healthcare, and now it is. So and I made a nice amount of money on that. So I don't want to give the impression that, listen, we got to all, and I have always looked at jobs candidly as a benign form of a plantation, because there are challenges in speaking your mind in a corporate setting. It doesn't matter who you are. There are challenges in being who we are, other in corporate settings. And those challenges don't go away in entrepreneurial settings, but you don't have to sit every day next to somebody that doesn't get you. You do have the opportunity to watch, a basketball game or a football game, your children's plays, or read in your children's classroom. Those were the benefits of being an entrepreneur for me, is that I was really able to be present in my children's lives. Now, what I also had challenges at times being is financially supportive, because you didn't get a check on the 1st and the 15th. And as I got older, as I got more sophisticated as an entrepreneur, I figured out methodologies to balance the time commitments that I needed for my business, and the money that I needed to generate with my business with my family needs. And that has been really the greatest success of my entrepreneurial career, was creating normalcy relative to cash flow and time, because you do work all the time. You can't tell yourself call in sick, that kind of stuff. And so there can be times when it's hard to draw those lines hard and fast on when to stop, and take care of yourself.
So tell me, Ricardo, you're back in, sort of, right? Because I wouldn't necessarily call Marvel Citizen your stereotypical sort of corporate environment. It's a different place, right? But do you think being an entrepreneur has made you better at your role within Marvel Citizen?
No doubt. And it would have made me better at any business that I went to, because after a while, there are things that you just don't do. I mean, I tell young entrepreneurs, don't meet in the city core, because you got to pay for parking. Meet somebody. If you live in Minneapolis, meet in Uptown. If you work in downtown St. Paul, then meet on Grand Avenue. These are quick drives out of the city center, but you don't have to do that. Well, now if I have those same thoughts, those same methods of thinking, I'm saving the company money. I also understand the value from an entrepreneurial standpoint of every interaction, and that how those interactions are judged. The thing that I've seen in corporate America, that the having important meetings seems to have replaced closing business. And when you're an entrepreneur, the only time you eat is when you kill. You don't eat for witnessing a deer running by, or walking through a field of corn. You eat when you harvest that corn, and you only harvest that corn when you've planted it and when you cared for it. And so being able to take that type of a purposeful day-to-day work and applying it into a corporate setting, it really it translates very well. Unfortunately, the inverse doesn't. Going to lunches and doing the kind of things that you see day-to-day in corporate America, when you get into the entrepreneurial world, you will get your lunch handed to you. Mm-hmm. It is one of these things where you have to manage your burn rate of money. You have to manage your burn rate of time. You have to manage those relationships, managing those expectations. So when you do have an important meeting, you've had a meeting before the meeting, so they understand this is what I'm here to accomplish. And the casual nature of corporate business, at least as I have seen it, would be a death knell in an entrepreneurial environment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's so much that you said in that, right? I mean, just the value of every interaction. I mean, the most valuable thing that we have certainly is our time. We can get money back, right? You lose money, you can get it back. Once the day is gone, it's gone, right? Which is why we sit here having this call this day as opposed to sometime midday during the week. I mean, the reality is you got to get it in where you can get it in, fit it in. So time is of the utmost importance. As I said to you before, I fancy myself a recovering corporate guy. And that was one of the things that I had to learn, right? The whole notion of just getting together and having a meeting with someone. Not to mention, I can't tell you how many lunch meetings or breakfast or dinner meetings that I had versus say now. Man, I'll coffee you to death. But right. I don't know how many meals we're going to sit down and eat, right? Because that takes a hell of a lot of time and a whole lot of resources, this little thing we call money. And
that's right.
There's not in this resource of it. And I love the analogy that you don't get to eat by planting the seed in the corn crop, right? Or for seeing a deer run by. And that's not to minimize the relationship building that can happen in leading up to that. But one of the things I think that works really well is that you sort of have a contract in the beginning to say, hey, look, at the end of this time that we spend together, if we don't think that there's something that we can do together, let's agree to say, hey, there's no there. Maybe we can do something at a later date. But this one here, this probably doesn't fall within my ability.
Well, and I actually would say, in fact, it's not that it minimizes it. It actually runs to the core of a relationship. The thing is that when you do not have intentionality in your efforts, when really what you're trying to do is just put a name on a calendar, you're not creating a relationship. And so what I found in my entrepreneurial career was that you had to find out who these people were. You had to create a methodology that essentially said, the only way that I'm going to get what I want is by getting people what they want. And so in order to know what they want, you do have to create a relationship. It is a much more intimate transaction. You are spending much more time focusing on the needs of that client. And so I would say that it is a process that everyone should do. But again, there is a lethargy that happens when you are not responsible for, that if the meeting is really good or if it's just okay, you still get paid next week. Mm-hmm. If the meeting is now, again, eventually that comes to an end, but there isn't. So the thing that I brought from being an entrepreneur is that I'm going to be intentional in my interactions. I'm going to respect these people's time. But there is an ethos inside the entrepreneurial spirit that resonates everywhere. And that people, when you're talking with, veterans, I had dinner with the CEO of Target a few weeks ago. And the thing that he was talking about when he'd made an $8 million investment in the stores, $7 million physically in the store and $7 million in the stores and $7 billion in the stores and then $1 billion with his employees. He was just talking about being able to create value in those day-to-day experiences. And whether we're talking about a man who was talking about making an $8 billion investment, or you're talking about a person like myself that says, okay, I'm going to have to spend $60 to park downtown Minneapolis for the next 4 hours. Those decisions are not very different. We're looking for the same outcome, and finding that commonality, finding those bridges on a day-to-day basis. That's the discipline you learn as an entrepreneur that translates so very well into a corporate environment. Inversely, when corporations allow this environment of no, this environment of I won't get fired for making making no decision, but I can get fired for making a bad decision. That environment is bad for business. That environment is bad for innovation. It is why Marvel does so well, because we disrupt that thinking. And the companies that bring us on are looking to hear the truth. And that truth is that risk is involved in everything you do. The difference for us is we do not hand you a parachute and say, jump out the plane. Because the whole landscape is littered with parachutes that opened too soon or didn't open at all. We help you build the parachute. We jump out the plane with you. And it doesn't always land smoothly, but you land safely. And that is the marriage between my entrepreneurial world and the corporate world I now inhabit. I'm no longer sitting on the sidelines just working for me. I get to work for a team, and that's cool. It is fun watching. I get a win, I come in and everybody in the office is like, sweet, good job, Ricardo. When before I'd have to call you or, or I'd call one of our frat, or I'd call one of my kids or my wife. So it's nice to have that team environment. You and I talk about this all the time. You do not have many times when you're an entrepreneur, a team environment. And so you begin to ask yourself, is this just me, or is this a great idea? Is it me, or were they crazy? You do have some people that you can kind of bounce that off.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No doubt about it. I tell you what we've tried to do here And what I tried to do, Ricardo, is help the people that are listening to understand what is the mindset difference that it takes in one versus the other. And I would say that while there's a different sort of mindset that you take, or that mindfulness maybe that you have to have, clearly I think you've articulated quite nicely how being an entrepreneur and that entrepreneurial mindset could benefit you inside of your corporations. And, I've had some people ask, well, why do you want to do this if you work, your clients are corporations? Are you trying to steal their people away? No, let me be very clear. I'm not. What I'm trying to do is two things. I'm trying to help those people who are looking to leave to think long and hard about doing it and have a plan for doing it. But I'm also hoping that my corporate clients hear this and understand that the people whose efforts they leave very much so have entrepreneurial endeavors. And there may be a way of maximizing that, making them entrepreneurs, if you will. And so that's why I'm having this conversation and sort of wanted to lay that out. I loved how you talked about the intentionality of your efforts. I think when you're a preserve animal, if you like to call them, I think you have more time to get things done, right? Because they sort of move on a quarterly fashion, right? You're in a corporation, everything is quarterly. You're working toward that next quarter. Whereas an entrepreneur, you might be working on that next quarter hour or quarter day or the quarter of your month, right? So everything is just sort of at warp speed, I guess I would say. And if it's not at warp speed, then it does require a level of tensionality that does get to where it is you're trying to get to, right? I've worked in corporations, quite honestly, where, there was little in the way of accountability because you knew you weren't going to be there long enough for when the measurement actually happened on the back end where you would be held accountable, you'd be off to your next job already. And so in many instances, some of that accountability was lost. And so, Ricardo, like I said, I won't take a whole lot of your time, but the last thing that I will ask you is if there was just one piece of sage advice that you would share with a listener that would be thinking about, that romantic notion of being their own boss, what would that one piece of information be?
I think it's like anything. It's a journey. And if you can figure out a way to have some kind of consistent revenue stream coming in, and it might be another job that you take that isn't as glamorous, but gives you time to do that. It may be a reduced role in your existing position so that in the evening, weekends, you can grow your business. What I would say is that if you are going to start a business and ostensibly live off of your savings, don't do it. Don't do it. Because what happens is money begins to make a decision for you. It begins to impact how you operate in your personal life and in your professional life. It begins to impact the value proposition that you bring to every interaction. And so the more that you have relative to resource to mitigate the impacts, the demands of the day-to-day costs of being an entrepreneur, the more free your mind is to execute whatever it is you believe you can bring to the business world as an entrepreneur.
Ricardo, thank you. We've sat here today with Ricardo Johnson II, serial entrepreneur turned managing director at the phenomenal firm of Marvel Citizen. And you may not know it, but there are a number of brands that Marvel Citizen, that's part of their portfolio. They've brought more than $1 billion of value to the market in 6 short years. And so, sage advice from Ricardo Johnson II, who happens to be my Kappa fraternity brother. I appreciate you joining me. And as I always say, leadership is personal. Here's the better results.
If you join us here each and every week, you'll get a tidbit of information and insight that'll help you be the best version of yourself. Come back next week. Be sure to join us on Facebook within the Facebook group. Check us out on Twitter and on Instagram. Kevin D. Wright. Look us up. Check us out. Link to us online. Love to hear from you. Unlike some of the other podcasts, I want to hear directly from you, and I will answer your question. There's no question too tough, so together we can solve it. Stop back and tell a friend. Leadership is personal. Here's the better results.